Do you want to hear about the biggest lesson that I ever learned while reviewing discovery in a criminal case? If you said yes, then this video is for you. Welcome to the PI Guy, tips, tricks, and advice for professional private investigators just like you. My name is John Morris. I'm a licensed professional private investigator in Colorado. When doing criminal defense cases, you will get all kinds of things to review in discovery. I mean, all kinds of things, tons of things. Things like police reports and police notes, things like body-worn camera video footage, dash cam video footage, security camera video footage as well. There are photos, witness statements, audio recordings, and the list just goes on and on. I learned early on in my private investigator career to make sure that I reviewed everything. I mean everything in great detail. While reviewing everything provided to me, I also make notes and I start an initial plan for my investigation. These notes and preliminary planning come in very handy for those cases where you have way too much detail to try to remember. In most of my criminal defense cases, the initial discovery is not usually overwhelming, but even in the most basic cases, it can still add up to a lot of stuff. For instance, a basic DUI case will usually have at least 2 police officers' reports, a booking report, photos from on scene, police body-worn camera, video footage from each officer, video at booking possibly, dash cam video possibly, and reports from people who may have administered BAC tests. So even in a basic case like that, you might still have 2 or 3 hours of discovery to review. I always review it all once, taking light notes. I say light notes because I want my first review process to be highly focused on what I am reading, watching, and hearing. I tend to catch things often the first go around that I might not notice as easily the second or the third time. The second time, I take more detailed notes and I start working on that initial investigation plan. So, with this step, if there is considerable video and audio evidence, I am spending a lot of time pausing, rewinding, and re-reviewing. Then after that, I start to work up a list of questions I want answers to. This list serves several purposes. One, it gives me some targets to hit when I am interviewing witnesses, police officers, or just requesting further information. But it also provides me with more direction in round 3 of discovery review. Yep, I go through it all again, this time with my list of questions. These questions may be things like, who were the other 2 officers on the scene that were in the video? Where are their reports? Who took the scene photos? They appear to be from 2 different cameras. Who were the firemen and the ambulance workers on scene? Are they possible witnesses to anything? I generally look at reviewing discovery as my way of building a list of questions that need answers. And that list of questions helps me determine the path my investigation will take. Now, in today's case study and lessons learned video, we will take a look at a huge criminal case I had a while back. Now, due to the sensitive nature of the case, I will have to leave out a lot of the details regarding the charges and allegations. But that aside, we can still learn a lot from the review of discovery on this case, and I will discuss the biggest lesson I ever learned in reviewing discovery in just a moment. Now, this case was in a rural town and it involved the police from this small town as well. The sheriff's office and the state patrol were involved too. My client, the defendant's attorney, contacted me and requested my involvement. In the initial request, I was also told this would pretty much be a full-time gig for about 6 months. When I reviewed the discovery, I realized what they meant. This was, at that time, the biggest case I ever had. I knew I was in for a long haul. Not only did I receive tons and tons of photos and reports, I also received quite a bit of police audio recordings. The police department for this town did not have BWC, body-worn cameras, for their officers at that time. In fact, most police departments, except the larger ones, did not use them at that time. But they were a little ahead of their counterparts in other smaller jurisdictions as their officers were equipped with body-worn audio recorders. Now, as a general rule, whether it is body-worn cameras or audio recorders, most police departments have policies set as to when and how to use these devices. Most of the time, you will find that the policy is to start recording when they believe they will have contact with the general public or if they believe they need to document evidence. This police department had similar policies, so the audio recordings did not cover all of the events that night, but it did cover a great deal of the events involving the police. There were several police officers involved, and their investigation that night took about 5 or 6 hours, so you can imagine how much audio recording was involved. Now, it took me one entire 10-hour day to sift through the discovery on my first pass. And I did this rather quickly too. I knew I had skipped some of the audio recordings, but I fully planned to listen to them all in completion on round 2. I skipped a lot of it because there were huge sections where an officer left the recording going on while he was driving, or while he was writing a report, or doing other tasks for a long time, and he was not directly involved with anyone. But I knew it was vitally important for me to go through it all eventually. After my first round of review, I had an extensive list of questions I needed answers to. One of them was to identify each officer involved by their voice. Some of the recordings I heard someone talking in the background, but I had no idea who it was. So I had to make myself a list of all of the players involved, a cheat sheet sort of. That had each person's name and some characteristics of their voice so I could identify them in each audio recording. The nice thing was every officer involved had some type of recorder, so I could listen to their particular recordings, and I knew the loudest and clearest voice was probably the person wearing the recorder. After I had my cheat sheet sorted out, I then set out to listen to everything again in its entirety and make extensive notes as to what each person said at critical moments. This is where it gets interesting, folks. Just hang on. The best part is yet to come. This next round of reviewing just the audio recordings took me literally 3 full days. There were many times I had to put the recording into a software program, I use Audacity for this, and take out background noises. Now, if you have ever tried to do this, it is a true pain in the rear, as you may have to do it 3 or 4 times to get it clear enough in one part so you can hear the background voices clearly. I'm telling you, Control-Z, the undo shortcut for Windows systems, became my best friend indeed. Now, there was one officer who had responded late in the game and never had contact with the defendant at all up to this point. In fact, his primary role in this case was to pick up one of the alleged victims and get a statement from her. After speaking with her at a relative's house, she was convinced to go down to the police station accompanied by her relatives to provide a formal video statement. The key word in that is video, folks. That was another crucial part of this investigation. Now, the officer did a fine job interviewing her. He first asked her most of the questions in a more casual setting with his body-worn audio recorder running. I'm not sure, however, that he even knew it was running all the time. After that, he then asked her if it was okay to videotape her interview, and she agreed. He then video recorded the interview. Again, nothing wrong here. I think he probably went through the questions first without the video running to make sure nothing surprising came up, which I think is a no-no, but that is a topic for another discussion. After he did the video recording for her interview, he asked her for a written statement too. So now we have an audio recording, a video recording, and her written statement at the police department, as well an audio recording and the officer's handwritten report from when he initially interviewed her at her relative's house. When I compared all of these different versions from the alleged victim, much to my surprise, they all matched relatively well. I have had many cases where that is not the case, where I hear differing stories in different recordings or statements. That was pretty surprising in this case, that it was all pretty well aligned. But that isn't the big lesson here, folks. The big lesson I learned is coming right up. I continued to listen and take notes of all those hours of recordings, and lo and behold, at almost the very end of that officer's audio recording, long after he finished his video recording of the alleged victim's interview, I heard the most interesting sound in the background. Now, this officer is still sitting at his desk. He is typing up some stuff. You can hear the clickety-clack of his keyboard. The alleged victim is still sitting in his office waiting for him to finish up and tell her she can leave. Then I hear it. A faint ding-dong, like a doorbell in the background. Now, I was like, what the heck was that? I hear what sounded like 2 sets of feet walking, and they keep getting closer and closer. Then suddenly the footsteps stop. Then I hear someone ask, where should I take him? Then I hear the officer that just took the alleged victim's statement say, down to the holding room is fine. Oh my goodness, is this real? Did what I think happened just really happen? Did they just walk the defendant past the alleged victim at the police department? Yep, after comparing all of the notes, the times, the audio recordings, the video recordings, everything else, it became very apparent they did just that. Now, in this case, the alleged victim and defendant did not know each other, but he was just walked right past her. After that, you can hear her say softly, "Was that the guy?" And what sounds to be the officer saying something like, "I can't really tell you." Now, I was so excited I could hardly wait to tell my client, but I also knew I had to finish up some things in my discovery review. I also made note when they interviewed the defendant for 2.5 hours, they did not do a video interview. Now, the officer that interviewed the alleged victim pulled out a handheld camcorder to do that interview, and he was involved with the defendant's interview, so he could have used the same camera, but they decided not to. Why is this important, you ask? Great question. You see, they had 30 minutes of the alleged victim crying and sobbing and truly showing signs of fear as she went over all of the details. But when it came to the defendant, they had nothing visually to present. Nothing to show his physical condition. Nothing to show he was in shorts and a t-shirt and no shoes. Nothing to show him squirming in his seat as he asked about 6 times to use the restroom, and nothing to show absolutely no signs of injury to his body, which was very important in his defense. They had nothing to show that he sat there cooperative for over 2.5 hours while 3 officers took turns interrogating him. They got breaks every 15 minutes or so. They had refreshments. They had food, but they left this young man sitting there trying to figure out what was going on. Now, before I tell you the outcome of this case, the big lesson I learned here, folks, was cover every single piece of discovery multiple times, no matter how long or how boring it takes. Had I not done that, had I not taken the time to edit that audio so I could clearly hear what happened when they brought in the defendant, I would have never known what happened. That doorbell was on the back door of that police station. It alerted everyone in the building that someone had entered. And that officer didn't flinch when the other officer stopped right at his doorway with the defendant, and there sat the alleged victim. Now, I use the word alleged a lot, and I will say I do believe this young lady was a victim in this case, but she was not a victim of the horrendous charges that these officers pinned on the defendant and the DA, for whatever reason, chose to pursue. And she most definitely was not a victim of the defendant. This small-town police department and this small county DA found themselves in what they thought was the crime of the century, and it probably was for them, but they had the wrong guy. Our investigation aided the defense team to get a full walk for the defendant. He was acquitted on all 4 counts, and then the civil case started against the police officers, the police department, and the DA's office. But that is a story for another time. Hey, here are 2 more videos that I made just for you. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the PI Guy channel. And remember, folks, stay safe out there.